He did the real Mission Impossible. Never mind Tom Cruise in the movies. This guy did the Mission Impossible.
Ami sudlo, halunat, halunano nanganim. Hanong tinyang nakatsakalo ang mga ata, ang ikatigay ka sa aksutak. Isumakatatud.
The answer is that massive development has come into the homeland of the Inuit during the past few years. Our negotiations are an attempt to come to terms with the new realities that have been presented to us.
They were very young, these elders, when, like David in the Bible, they stood up to the Goliath of Hydro-Quebec and the Quebec government. It was a fight that left deep marks. 40 years later, they want to tell their story.
I was born 6 years after the James Bay and Northern Quebec Agreement was signed. Of course, I had heard about it from my parents and a bit in school, and I understood that my education, the clinic, the arena, and the airlines were linked to the agreement. So when the Inuit signatories decided to speak out, I got a chance to search for the real story of how it all happened.
Siapa nakaluakpat, hula talo, ikayok tiga halangan ngat takulak na milyo, sapik na milyo. Sapik tayo di kasoto na si mabuli, biyunak sauman. Susaya kaluabot, sapilak sa iyo, sa kamay ngakso, sapik tayo ni ngakso ta. Tapos tikiyot sa kasuwa hakata.
In 1970, a new wave washed over Quebec.
C'était à l'époque de la Révolution tranquille. Le Québec avait pris énormément de retard dans différents domaines. Et avec la Révolution tranquille, le Québec était un peu comme concentré sur son propre effort et ses propres défis.
The new premier was called Robert Bourassa. He had big plans for the North.
Le développement de la Belgique, mes chers amis, est la clé du progrès économique du Québec.
Le Québec était en train de s'électrifier dans les années 60. M. Bourassa était très conscient qu'il aimait rencontrer les besoins avec l'énergie québécoise et en créant ce qu'il avait promis à son élection, la possibilité de créer 100 000 emplois.
L'objectif que nous considérons prioritaire pour le Québec, pour la société québécoise, c'est de créer 100 000 nouveaux emplois.
Hydro-Québec était le joyau de l'époque. C'était le navire amiral, si on veut, de ce développement, le développement économique. Et les Québécois étaient derrière le projet, énormément.
Alla simayuni aulla realinnik. Alla vimmo teikon post office moktisunga takulok simayunga. Takwa government of Quebec, the Liberal Party. Imeigu tigigu malaktanginnik.
Charlie Watt, nunang mga nakikiyak, piyuwin yun ni matkunni ati sa nalaktaminnik, nunang mga mo kay si magutinganik.
The dams that would power the south of Quebec would destroy much of the north. It was the largest construction project in North America and a big financial gamble for Quebec.
Bili katigin nga ni kulariyes loksimut.
Kutwaap miot ikaruk makitwalo dan harili kami kutwaap isimittaw nekto.
Imallo ni ku hanasimit ito sa mga sibigul tuwin na lurang tevet yun yakto tira. Si Mantian ulit tiaslo temay lok nirakto si Marot ang tulon nili tema nutagum man.
Ito pala talo.
Hadlunahan ta kung makayarlok sa Marot ang enta. Iwisak kita malaw ko wakto.
Under the British, all of the Canadian Arctic was called Rupert's Land. In 1912, part of Rupert's Land was transferred to the province of Quebec. Quebec wanted the land for its resources, but it wanted nothing to do with the people who lived there. It forced Ottawa to do that part. The result was that northern Quebec was a poor and neglected place, even compared to the rest of Arctic Canada.
Taib sa mani tamaw nga kayo ka kaw tigilaw si mayo nga tama ni nunat siyang me magkwa inusyo iswa ko tao bakto maning imatasuli ukto tingwal lugo mibvekat siyang ito kagla ilang inunalit mibvekang ito tama ni nunat siyang me ukalaw tid asingilo Ulu tamak piusang mod pituk si mayo takuwak tawo maningin nga kaw tigilaw si mayakap. Amarot tawang ikaw gumalarang may kang tayo kun umehak tukul ilang ang ikaw katak sudik. So lo gavamanul kamagayot siyang itunik kahit sumani tikulaw si mayo nga.
Kasi ni ilang naktulak si mamatatako halo natin sumani po sa tilunga. Ilang naktulak yang Hawi titaw hatta ni ko katta nga jokhabot ilira so hatta si mamata ilinni ala galo ga khagabe jaw hatta lok si maga manana ganun ilinni ang ito ko be makundi nga ikayo tini pe khadala ngan tejni ilinni ang nara khagabe jaw hatta lok si magatta
Today, we are about 12,000 Nunavummiut. But in 1970, we were only 4,000, a tiny minority in Quebec and with no experience in fighting for our rights. The young Inuit who would soon be standing up to Hydro-Quebec and the government were still in school or scattered around the territory. But a few were beginning to ask questions.
In 1969 otidlago. Tangak sualo drama no talok sa mga makavamak ko ni pinasutsunga sule. Nityan alla ni vinagayaga opposition parties ngulok sa mga matatait sa mani conservative John T. Van Baker tayo na alla bigilok sa mga ko. Aswila kaya ko yaw gama hangat tayo ko tama nga ito wamak to. Tayo may giyakang itong agokaw tutolok sa mga. Ataw siya Kikatoya kang inunni. Bishop. Hallo na. Donald the Arctic at the halok si Mayo na Bishop Mutsun. Dahil na go, di tiyago ta kaya haktutum. Inusok to sa ngalawa, wakak si mamala, you young fella, layaw lungat na. Right, so man, I was about 23, 24, maybe around there. Tayo may galak to 7 years. At sokok to mo sungo niping at sokok to mo kaw to tayo kamatay ma ipigilak sa mga iminik amot ukalima biolak po nga. So isumaga hanok katakti tayo sa wakto yaklon.
Garmato kakut isumabalay baraw mang mata uko kadlunanod luni aura tauro arat palay sa kay pagbisagara gumayunod imailiw kasuk para mang mata garmatokak.
There were no outsiders in the room when Inuit from across Canada's Arctic took their first big step to organize. Taga Curley was elected their leader.
Taga Curley was there, Charlie Watt was there. Many of the leaders that we see nowadays were at that conference. He was talking about a political movement that Inuit have to step up to another level of taking over their lands again. And we've never quite heard that kind of talk before. That meeting in Pangnirtung seems to be the catalyst for the whole Inuit movement. And we all left that meeting very hopeful for another better future.
I was looking back to see if you were looking back to see. I was looking back to see if you were looking back at me.
The Inuit of Quebec were ready for better times. The cooperative movement was growing. Young people were getting higher education. New ideas were in the air.
September 1971, Mutidlugo.
Inuit luami sa mga araw tsuditay kong nga to. Nung nabilimaan pisimayo. Makoinan nito kimuha ko tahaksun eh. Kapamaliw tuwin na ko malakturo. Oo, Inuit karup sa hatigin niya ulaw kata.
Teka ni katimajuit uhayangin ni tusago mo yung makayalot sunga isu magalo. Aulat datak tao mitsuni. Ilagi yaw badli ako magyamik. Isu makalok si marunga.
Inuit karup sa hatigin niya nga. Dahil na piyan niya kumangmaw ni tahan na isu magayang makalok si marunga.
That's how the Northern Quebec Inuit Association, NQIA, was born. It became the Inuit weapon to fight back against the hydro project, and these were the young Davids. Before long, they would meet the Goliath called Hydro-Quebec, who was flexing his muscles down in James Bay.
Tikiyok kadupalo at talong mata. Dahil nalo, Quebec ka mga taangit si Marangit, pinaswak pala yung hakakta si Dr. Nunamik. Kukilingi sa ligoy Dr. Nunamik. At lahat lumikiyak na yabing makaipingit. Sukat daw Dr. Taman na tusaw makatalak sugo. Charlie Watt lo, tusakan no. At lahat ko, James Bemio, katimalangang mata. Kaya sumani Inuit dito at halok sumirutay na nuna may lasikunik. Halunar dito at haksuni Fort George, James Bay mito. Sunaswak to hak na yapalo, hawayaw tiyak to sunok, inyong nikik at ulakan no. Itlakata, inyong nikik at ulang matay na katigin no.
The Inuit could not fight Hydro-Quebec alone. They needed allies.
They said they wanted to join us to be stronger. He said, if we go together, he said, we'll be stronger. Separately, you guys will be all right, but we're not going to be all right.
At that meeting, there was a bitter argument between the Indians of Quebec Association and the Inuit people.
Katungan ingak kalak tilago dai kan Fort George me Indian Quebec Association kuno katingan titaw chutik. Dako ikhatui yingit. Sibuni chaliak tu travel la khutigi lak se magaki. Nam magilak se mangita kataman. Dan nam mangimat nam khutigi nginakko pa khatui na laga mo khaw sikut dako ngak khatui ja khutigi jangin suna ane ko yaw la khilangat suna.
At that stage, we had nothing to guide ourselves with, except what we figured. You know, we want to hold on to our traditions. We didn't actually have no guidance from anyone, except to ask those consultants what, you know, how to go about.
And I went after Charlie, and I said, Charlie, wait a minute, don't go, don't leave town, stay. And I said, give me 1 hour.
Then angutik Billy Diamond Nui talluagit tiko hanuil naukkuusunikia katingalio hati takuna tavineratsugo itsivajuni sivunittinilaqtilugo anigiasitsugukkuami tigumialaqsilunga talikkutiguligilaqsimalaga aulla tailigine laligitsugo.
So I went back into the meeting with the Indians of Quebec Association, and I argued that we needed the help of the Indians of Quebec, the Northern Quebec Inuit. We needed to have an alliance with the Northern Quebec Inuit. We needed to band our resources together.
Charlie Watt tamanna anirti tawlaw kallunuk uhawdi yaw ngalawaqnu awkago ilaw yalla bahangituut lalo khang ngalawaqpat alwin nagayalla twinna lang alwalaq simagannu.
And finally they voted. They said yes, the Inuit of Northern Quebec can become our partners.
No land claims had yet been negotiated anywhere. There was no recognition of Aboriginal rights in Canadian law. Cree and Inuit leaders asked for a meeting with Premier Bourassa.
You know, there's a big table, and it was called Oval Office. That's where the meeting took place. Tuumasikallamik kansumiomik ukhalimalakhalaqsimalukun. Taina taamas kallak aulay sawaya uhartiatumai. Taima piusakhasoga mukhalimalagami haulimalagattamin ukhasam.
The spokesman that we chose that day was my father, Malcolm Diamond, and he had been chief for a long time of our village. And he spoke in Cree. And he began to describe the Cree way of life, how important that land was, how important that this project should not proceed without the permission of the Crees. But before he was finished, Robert Bourassa gathered up his papers and basically walked out and said, I can't hear this. I can't listen to all of this. Anyway, he said, I've decided the project is going through. Nobody's going to stop it. And he walked out, slammed the door and walked out.
Isumaminikisiani namminak imegumanang minik. Langanang minik, umanang minik utangito, langanang minik.
The Inuit and Cree had believed that honest discussion would make the government understand, but they were rejected. Now, as underdogs, they had only one option left: go to court.
Isumaliuga halaqsimalugut piusiuloqsimangisiaqtumi Canada mi maanilu Quebec mi piusiuloqsimangiluakkanertumi qanu unammisugaswaqtu sauvita government Quebec government angiqsimatsialertanginnik.
We know that we need someone who's going to fight. We need a fighter. And we turned to James O'Reilly and said, Mr. O'Reilly, when can you be ready?
6 weeks later, they're ready for battle.
We have no doubt in our mind that we own the land. We're not going to go around trying to prove that we own it. It's up to the people who are invading it to try to disprove our ownership.
Charlie could take any Kayusakatauratilugi, Katausimaratilugi, Katubigmi. Tano kumain Naktalaurosimayo. Nunabut ila Nunatia mo, tunaw ito, nunawig mudlo amat namulima. Piyum na nga, ino isaraw kadlakpata. Siwunit tinitay maingin na tuwid na kaya kakata. Aksok tuwarurok tugo, ikayok tuwid luta. Piyum na nga, surely man, significant impact. Kaya na kaya raw, mabungari mga karaw.
It was huge. It was monumental. We had to demonstrate that this was an identity crisis. This was a challenge to the identity and the way of life of the people who lived in those lands. The place was full of our clients, Inuit and Cree. It was full of journalists who were looking to witness this historic argument. And the issue was debated for 2 weeks as to whether or not Aboriginal title to the land even existed.
The government didn't take us seriously to start off with. He said the judge is going to throw it out in 15 minutes or so.
The judge was very unique. We noticed this man taking many, many notes. And we noticed this man was not like the other men, that his color was different, and that he was not as white as the others.
Les juristes de la province de Québec avaient considéré qu'ils avaient le droit de développer le territoire. Donc, quand le projet a débuté, nous avions la base légale, si vous voulez, du point de vue de la province, pour faire les travaux.
Wow, aliway pala hatta si Mayok. Kupay miyo yusi. Nunabi miyo yusi. Inuit. Kabamasi kupay kabamanga. Piyunaw de hatangi makamagon na nunglik. Umayo ni take umitunik. Asiano kabamamo kamagiyaw mata. Tamakopigi hangita si. Tay may tukasan na hawit itaw hatta lagata. Hano.
Tukisimang itullagayo ni kajang hanuito manganta, suna mangata, hanoklo ni kasung mangata, suna millo umagutehang mangata, suna millo pitutehang mangata. Tukisimang ni makatsiatot ipinaktulak sa masin.
They tried to make you feel small. Do you remember that?
Sunod siya Sunod slur. Waxi te alaw to the lawyer.
The Aboriginal witnesses are not used to that. Why people would attack their credibility, attack what they were saying. And I remember it was a Cree witness who was asked by the interpreter, well, you swear to tell the truth and whole truth and nothing but the truth. And he wouldn't, he said no. And Judge Malouf asked him, well, what do you mean you won't tell the truth? And he said, I cannot tell you the truth. I can only tell you what I know.
Umarok nesiman tintamane. Bisa nilimat siyangan ay wakaya halak si marunga. Atadak kut nilo. Ukaktis chunga. Bisa kaya to kulawlak si marudana. Day melangat lo.
But they came and they really poured their hearts out. That was the beauty of it. They told us about their life, how they were raised on this land and how they lived off that land and how they appreciated the land and how connected they were to the land. It was part not only of their culture, it was part of their identity, it was part of their soul.
Judge Malouf throughout had almost like a stone face, and you couldn't tell which way he was going on any topic. And to the very, very end, we didn't know.
Judge Malouf heard 167 witnesses. Then he took 5 months to deliberate, and then
the project was stopped. We stopped the project.
Kunniati nukkalawluk. Kunniati James Bay haktiriyununamik saligoktut nunaliriyunut taimalawlik pinsuarunailit takwa inuillu allailu pidjutimin inuit silaurningat sulineraqtaumata.
4,000 construction workers were suddenly idle. The cost to Hydro-Quebec was $500,000 a day. But the government would not accept the injunction. It launched an appeal the very next day, and 6 days later, the court suspended Judge Malouf's injunction. The project was back on track.
The Court of Appeal erased 6 months of work, 2 months of argument, oral argument, written submissions to Justice Malouf, a couple of months of his deliberating on this, and the Court of Appeal gave all that the back of its hand and said, no, it's just important for the people of Quebec to have this project continue while you're arguing this case through other levels of hearing.
After their big victory, it was a slap in the face for the Inuit and Cree. "40 years later, they still remember that crucial moment back in 1974.
Inuit. Ayan eh. Inuit pa alawin itakko litsuman. Ipigasan.
Semanno. Yun siakto ni wala totto takon na suwi.
Tan naga sa Jimmy Johannes. Nagahat ako na laksin takay nagahat sangong.
Hydro-Quebec was allowed to continue the project, but Judge Malouf had ruled that Inuit and Cree have rights, so the government was forced to negotiate. The young NQIA team faced a big test.
Noaga suara halauksi majakka tatsumenga tili jaune harama katingan haksuta board of directors no tamakkonga khatigigutit anga khatigiga sornekut ingirtalerutta aulatsigia harniatuit niahoriya khattarea harniatluaq soria halauksi ammata.
One of the first things I learned to do as a manager was, if you don't have the expertise, hire it, but make sure that person you're hiring knows more than you do, and don't be fearful of them. So, you know, sitting with Charlie and the rest of the executive, I said, you need certain things. You need people to negotiate. And Charlie went and hired Greg Fisk from Alaska.
Amalutain Alaska meo Greg Fisk. Alaska mi tappaan himokreaktusimatsunga pinasutti saktaarilaksima miyaga unna pitjutikitsugo isumaganik isumahagalatsunillo piusahagalatsunillo katsungaittugalauningalu ippikitsugo angaatuinnahajangituugunauningalo ippikitsugo taanna pigunnaninga ilitaknatuulermat tigulauksimayawa taanna Mark R. Gordon haujimallugo ajuinnaqunna tupigasuagunna tummariujoq atutuinna simat nangittu tamatsumaan kisiani aulatsilare hatiusimaja takkanangi hatigiga suarnemi sorlo takunnautingi kaloaranno hanno angi hatigiga suarsuno naammana hattautinnermi pinasua hatigigunna nerijaputanna haujimagiilauksimagattigu tamanno katutligiarunna nivullu katingeina limaanginnaqalo ngikkaloarunno
Quebec ilainapia tuqquapian kisiani Innalo Ontario, Dirqapian Kisan, Dana Canada Vinulario, 100 years ago.
Upikitsaasawat aina saaliwat naqtaunnataa lagunnataqallaat sangawat agane upikkausunille enyamnelu soppumissune pibillianagilaqaramene ja sivune hagaittuveni.
These four made up the core Inuit negotiations team.
15,000 square miles. 15,000 miles be out there Yukon.
Makitaguritsahareharnivut takkua silaullu uumaruillu nunaullu kuullu imaillu piussingit qanuilingaatertauniarpata uvagut tsunamik isuartuliviugulitsatnik isumagiyaugiahartugut.
The basic endpoint for both the Cree and the Inuit remained the same, was to have access to the same services as everybody else in the South, have the James Bay project adapted to their needs to a certain extent, have access to the right economic tools to be able to advance themselves, and have the option to maintain their traditional lifestyle. And that's what we were looking for.
With heavy machinery blasting rock and moving rivers, the government had prepared its strategy.
It turns out to be a bombshell. The rumors are true. In Montreal, Premier Bourassa and his chief advisor on Indian matters, John Chiacha, have summoned the newsmen for what's billed as an important announcement on the James Bay project.
40 million in cash, and it will be paid on a period of 10 years, and you will have 60 million, making a total maximum of 60 million.
It was a first offer. Like in all negotiations, you expect the give and take and you expect changes. But this was a beginning.
It was John Chiacha who had written the 11-point offer. It dealt with social and economic development, environment, education, money, land rights, and Inuit self-government.
Well, I had been Assistant Deputy Minister of Indian Affairs in Ottawa. I knew about the project, and I knew the positions that the Native people were taking.
Negotiations took place in the belly of the beast, the office of Hydro-Quebec's James Bay Division.
Office of the James Bay Energy Corporation. Spent many an hour in here, many days actually.
The first task would be to arrive at the principles of a settlement. A deadline was set, 11th of November 1974, 7 months away. But right away, the Inuit ran up against a government wall.
Quebec gabo mga sakkusakare hakpusi. Sunamilyoni alla simarumik ilsinupibille hutauni aktumik uharealaungintini. Sakkusakare hakpusi nuna dana nuna hakotigiyasi yogiyasi nuna hakkasimarunisi piyunnautingit sakkulauga kaasiaqtat nikisiani sunamik pibille hutini sunanik tappananga hatigigulit samittisiniarmangaatta pigunnapugut. Makua amisuit sakkehatlaoqsimmata sunahat angilsi pi utitsahat angilsi nunahat angilsi nuna kinyaupigivau uvagu pihaqtorigatta unataqtuni nunaertaoloqsimanginta gavamakkunullu saangajauluta saangahatigilugit nuna pillugu angihati nahaloqsimagata tamakkua nunami pittutaharnianivut nammi ilangani iluunnangani illuuni namminertaarasuarnianivut haulimanaloqsimaruugaluaq
taima ningautahatahariitaami hauligmagaviuli pitipiusarpalauma ilangani putsaarnasov taima illuni
J'avais établi, moi, à la SEBJ, une règle d'or. Je l'appelais le règlement numéro 1. Dans les négociations, il ne faut pas avoir d'émotion. Si quelqu'un devient émotionnellement pris par la négociation, il est automatiquement exclu de la négociation.
Quebec makkunigasualat sijoratsamarippalarakkuala ilaanni tukitaartasivalorma Quebec makkutukisaaratsajarluanganik tainna angutikallausuni aamakutsu tainna takka sitinerpaangusimalu ilanganiarlaangi ilangakunnaitaarami sivuningani iigi tappaunga illuanunga kaivititsuvik hakortainanga nuitalertilugu taimaittuavalaarmu nalunaqunnaippalaarmu angihattigigasuarsugu angilangangineriyangi iilingi taimailitaarmata.
One guy from up north, maybe I'll use his name, Eli Witalaktuk, who was here from Inukjuak. He got so frustrated at one point in time, he just looked at Armalkutsu and so just sort of screamed at him. He said, well, why don't you just get rid of us? Why don't you just bomb us with a nuclear bomb and just get us out of the way if that's the way you feel.
Teitsumanillu 1970 sakkaunginni nujakutaalipaalo hattasimagatta innustuusta teikkuatao kavamanniatikutiput nujakutaalipaalo uloksiammata teimaalu annoraangi teitsumani sukangatsutillu teimeittu galuarsuti kavamannia siloksimammata pimmarealunni kavamaalunni annoratsiasimajualni nujakittuusutti pillarealunni teimaittuni pinniatillugi takugiangi ajuaigisimajakka.
Finally, they told us, you guys are not serious. You're not talking for your own people. It's just, you joke a lot here. And this is when we said that, you should come to one of our communities. You come to Fort George and, talk to the people there. Find out what, if we were really serious or not. And he accepted the invitation.
J'ai proposé d'aller à Fort-Georges pour rencontrer les Indiens du village de Fort-Georges, qui était le village le plus affecté par le développement du projet.
The visit to Fort George would be a reality check. Finally, the people in the communities could tell the government and hydro officials exactly what they thought.
So I got up there and told them, I said, I want you guys, young people, to speak up and tell them the objection that you have about the project. I want a few elders to say that, but mostly I want the youth.
The pilot advised me that from what he heard, I shouldn't go to Fort George. So I thought about it. I said, no, I'm going.
They came. The young people were ready. The elders were ready. I opened the meeting for them, and then I let them have it.
And the people who were there were very aggressive. And we were on a stage. It was Armand, Couture, and myself alone. And around 11 o'clock at night, with all the hubbub and the airplane that had been waiting for us, I went to see the pilot. And I told them, listen, I know you have to pick up some other people in Val-d'Or. You can leave now. The pilot looked at me. He knew what was going on. He said, I am the captain of my ship. I am not leaving now. That made all the difference, because when the natives saw that the plane was staying there, they had an original intention, I was told, of kidnapping us. But when the plane stayed, they moved back.
No. Well, so somebody may have joked with that. They weren't going to kidnap her.
I never mentioned it. It was something that happened and was behind us. I was looking to the future. I was looking to getting a settlement that was acceptable to the native people.
Won't you talk with me a while? 'Cause I'm feeling so alone. All the people.
Teitsumani ukiaksaangu sillugu tamaunga tikiloqsimagama. Yao knife me. Sali wat pinasokatigineaqtaminig nuatsiwallialoqsimagman. Building up a team that he's gonna work with.
Unataga.
Tamani nunakakpalauqsimayugud. Ekwa Charlie Watkut, Markar, Zabari nungakut tamakwa. Aksakol like tilugit. Ang ikakakayakalaw at taitsumani. Katingagumatsutalu. Kinawaktakat siyang imat. Dahil nakakayak 1205 atok palawak si Mayawot, pingasun nakakayak kalawak tok. Ang marutaw kakayak ataw sa makon igli kaksunik. Uktu tingwak lago Mark Arlo. Iglumeo katigilawak si Magano.
And tonight we have with us Akulak, a bright new young star from Hamanuktuak. Is that right, sir? Hamanuktuak, thank you.
Down by the river in a little brown shack. Listen, Eskimo, his name is Rack. Living and fishing is his game, and no other game is but the same.
Langagut Inuit amisulanga tikisimayut. Time na iglorio akarea katokta ud mikilot siya marik palaw tong natituin ng misinik palaw mata kinawak takangim mata.
Kinawak ko bihawtimi atorun na si waloktugut. Hulak hawalok sutik. Lagilagon sa tugalay mahay sa magalok sutik.
Makunak tis tahareme turok miumigun na patuin yung galok suta. Inuit suta sadasik siya hulok sa marawin na. 30 sabot sot tata tema amisutigit suta. Makuinan na haren ni akiloktigun na lagata. Ginaraw kata. Natukmi akitahat angit tumi. Tema ang hatigiga sok tuil ang hatigiga sok ni tuilo ni arang kalok suta ilakan akiyak tu si marura kayak pelok mikatan arang kalok suta uluk kesin tuil angit ilang unno aku pinasok tuit tema ilulagat tatan uhumat tulok si marok.
Like ohaka kasibul me $159,000 Secretary of State kun nili kwafan ngotel lu pihatta lok si magatigit tak kino yakta lok si majabon Indian Affairs kun atta tot sautil ai tu siang.
It is true that the Department of Indian and Northern Affairs put pressure on the Inuit to move things along. Maybe it's time that you accepted the provincial offer. And NQIA was entirely dependent on what was called federal core funding, funded all of our operations.
Everyone was saying, James Bay can't stop. So land claims have to happen. And we were far enough along in the negotiations that we were able to arrange a line of credit with CIBC. When the pressure came from the feds, we said, okay, we've got our money elsewhere. And then the pressure went away.
Back at the negotiation table, several of the 11 points were moved along. But confrontation was looming over the most difficult issue of all, rights to the land.
Sakkusinyo kinguni nunami ilun na siya ngani pihak turin mata Quebec government sungulum makayalo ko tahak pihak asugin ng minik uwagut to allaylo pihak turin tinisungulwalo ko tahak misuta.
And I accepted that they had land rights. But also, from their side, I said, you have to recognize that the government is building a project, a hydroelectric project. We will put some restrictions on it, depending on what your problems are, but we have to have the right to build that project subject to those restrictions.
Mauna emailing ayumik inukkan haksuni ununga lingayumik sana viewsum tay na shuffle tay kanilo ato manigo iron yaching ito na fahta si mayut
nuna akku ngaklogo uttu tigilogo tanna nammini riyaw ni aktu yakade ko wan ngotilogo amalo tanna namminio ay panga nammini rilutungilogo pigunna be hakpigini akta bakade ko ito ngoyo anguna swa paswar ni military yaw tiktara yaw tanna angin nga nalunersugo amalo pigunna be hangin na siak na kalwarlo takana tamiyongonibo atoklogo Quebec miyongonibo atoklogo nunal to hatsa tuinna mitulone tanna category 3 ngoyo as imak citizens riyaw Quebec motakkani ilagi jawrino hatiyo pittu tigillogo.
The division of land into categories was a last resort, a compromise that weighs heavily on the lives of Nunavimmiut to this day.
Hauri magata piunak samik pigerak kungiamik asiagok tumidetsuma ilawigi hatta akkuditaka soakalwarnerutta piunak sami pigerak turingiamik hauri magata ubagulli angirlugugia harturiyugut.
The principle of agreement on the land issue was now settled, even if the real fight was yet to come. That led to the question of how to administer that land.
The Regional Council will have members from Ungava and Hudson.
Tahit sa manigaw maliong ng migaw kaw sa haktung mariwalaw si mayud Inuit awla yunga. Tahit kaniyag laman triyami. Allaving me maanisami alla si mayo hakpalaw si mang madgava mau tauto na yaktanig. 1973 may kaw sa haktunga. Gava mau paakik sok si managayaktanig nuite yo hakpalaw si mayo. Magkwa umayo laganak ilinyak to laganak tamangmig. Ilaw ti taut sutik.
And that led us to the whole concept of regional government. Govern for the benefit of everybody who lives there. It was a matter of self-determination. That was huge.
Mitaw te hak tumut iyo kayaw lok si marugut. Quebec gawa mga ta ang hatigi ka swak tinganot. Gawa mata kaya hak tok nunabut. Awlat siya hakat na menyo na tinik. Inyus tinlo iswa kaya tinyo. Mitaw te hak nemo iyo kayaw te halok kaso ni. Ayo hattuisi chunilo takuwit. Gawa may emailing about Canada me. Canada gawa mga abit to simarut provinces, territory lu gawa mangit, nuna lu gawa mapingit. Takutwa go Canada me manna. Nuna hakasi maru gawa mga ni nani tayaw maru hangilak.
Ilangan ni unno lima kalo sanga si sungulok si mamata. Teikani hatolok se miga munnu ilangin nunno ali maalo sanga si takko sali wakko je pitikko sapili yutti sullo angat au kala ja ngin ali maktu jaksutik una pigu ma jabu una emailinga ju pigale bununna bu temelo ngin ali maktu jaksuti sunna upatakko ukhumaitu.
Il y avait une deuxième règle d'or dans la négociation, c'était que si nous sommes bloqués et qu'on arrive à une situation où c'était totalement impossible d'en arriver à un consensus, ce qui est arrivé plusieurs fois, nous avions une deuxième règle d'or qui disait nous prenons 2 à 3 jours de répit, nous retournons chacun de notre côté pour réfléchir et nous revenons dans 2 et 3 jours.
The time frame was very tight, basically for the fact that the blasting and the bulldozing was going on while we spoke at all times, and so we weren't doing it under any ideal conditions by any measure.
Even with time running out, the Inuit insisted on getting some form of self-government. Quebec used legal arguments to oppose their demand. So it took a lawyer to turn the tables.
His name was Pierre Langlois, and he came in with this document leading up to this momentous meeting, which everybody was anticipating was going to be a real dogfight because there'd been such opposition. And he came in with the document and distributed copies all around the table and just went through an explanation of the whole thing and how it was all based on existing precedent in Quebec law. And the room was silent. I just remember John Chiacha was just like, I can't believe you guys did this. Like, he didn't give us a thumbs up, but it was like, okay. That took that hugely controversial thing basically off the table.
Is to remain for 1 year only and will be abolished.
So it was done. Inuit self-government was on the agenda. The NQIA team had compromised on the land issue in return for something important.
Amulutamakkuninga poliisi haknigalamit awultigunnasniaqtugut inuleqinerielqammit aannianileqinerielqammit awultigunnasniaqtugut mamaqunaqqauvaat lagutagivalortavut mamaqunaqqauvaat emittuhaloqsimangitugulni tamakkuninga awultigunnasniuhaataquni avittusimalahalaurugugut tukisiyullu, tukisingitullu.
15,000 miles to be out there with Yukon.
And at the end, we were all working round the clock and 7 days a week. And in point of fact, this was finally put to rest as a text in an all-night session the day before it was to be signed.
The Inuit and Cree were ready to sign off on the agreement in principle, the first big step. But suddenly, it was the Quebec government that was in trouble.
We were supposed to sign the agreement in principle, and it was supposed to be signed at 11. We sat there, and we sat there, and we waited and waited. Came close to 1 o'clock. Eventually, we found out that there were 6 ministers that confronted them, saying, "Do not sign the agreement." The Cree and the Inuit were getting too much. They still say that it's a Quebec, it belongs to Quebec. And they're getting too much. And then, of course, you know, what did the trick was to say, if you don't want to sign, you might as well say goodbye to the project.
It was a close call, a signal that the road to a final agreement would be hard fought. But for the moment, Premier Bourassa was relieved.
C'était essentiel à faire et comme on l'a dit, c'est la première fois dans l'histoire du Canada qu'un gouvernement d'une province en vient à une telle entente. Évidemment, il reste à signer l'entente finale, les négociations vont se poursuivre, mais c'est certainement un nouveau départ.
Now it was the turn of the Inuit team to sell the deal to their people.
All his life, summer and winter, Soroli has traveled this land. It's his home. In my generation, some of us got out on the land and became hunters. But other activities came along. School, of course, then hockey, computers, traveling. Our leaders who negotiated with the government 40 years ago knew that life would change and that Inuit had to be prepared. And so they pushed for the agreement to include all those basic building blocks that were part of my childhood and youth in Nunavik.
Quebec makut ningik taningata hitakkanganik ningik sigajagatta pigajaktanganik.
Ang ikatigin na kalaksuta at tiging ito makinig nuitsilak si magatta sa nga jawi hakto ko jatinik kanuila ko ti wi hakto ko jatinik takko no ka makkunut sakta wi hakto ko tigi jatinik tamakko illo hakti sa nillo amlo annia siok ne pinyar na kajangit ilinian lo tamakko ngojuin attu jangin makituin na kaya hakalwak sugit atto kaya halakilok si magatigit.
When the agreement in principle was signed, and we had a year for the final agreement, then I brought in the government representatives, all the various departments. We set up 8 subcommittees for the different subjects, and we proceeded.
The agreement in principle had been just the beginning. The next step would be even harder.
The lands shaded in dark brown are Category 1 lands, lands held in ownership by the Inuit as settled by the James Bay Agreement. The first Inuit land selections looked like a long series of snaking passages on sides of rivers and bays. The government of Quebec went absolutely ballistic. One of the main players in that exercise was a small, slight man named Paul Grenier, who was immediately given the nickname Hakoktapealuk by the Inuit elders. We almost came to blows many times with him because he was so adamant about not allowing any Inuit-owned lands to be covering any of these claims.
The government was uncompromising. The Inuit were upset. The NQIA team was now fighting on two fronts. Many issues flooded the negotiations table, but time was short. Pressure was building.
The process was so intense that you'd be trying to keep track of people that were negotiating until midnight, or 10 o'clock at night, or 8 o'clock at night. And you've got education going on over there, you've got environment going on over there.
Inumaki sila tujualo si mamata uhaw sila kaya nuhaw sa haksutik nunamin niya haw jimat siya kami umajuhti minilo haw jimat siya sutik tayo mga pinaswaki kami nala ni sa taga halawak sa majabu pigo maningit kawa makut imaylo hila kalo ang mata angin nangin mata angin ito pata ubagutto ang kataong ito kutamat suminga. For
most Inuit, the so-called extinguishment clause was hard to swallow and to fully comprehend.
Nok katwang anak kainak man. Sunel pugut. Tema. Umaru kataw sugut. Umaruit. Sunahat pagatik. Tamani. Not sudik. Khadmi not sudik temet tumuta. Temet tumukataw ugut. Nutilak sugut. Pinsokatigip bigistsu, katigip bigistsu, okatigip bigunloksu, tungavengan naman ni matuktasu. Halunalimatchen, kandamilimatchen, hawlulomata, pigellabahawna.
Sakkusinek ilawlaw ngipat angirayalawkit.
Marayalag. Ilaw mabugod. Inu hatigit tigit, adawsi hatigit tigit, inu piyangi pigit tigit. Ilaw mula po sa kusin na kami dokpat. Sain doon tigit daw tigli umrok sa mga tawag yung nakatawag ni Deme lang nata. Ini ko hangat ng ulo. Tagkuling alo sa nakatawag.
Tay na ikatuya ko tigiyabot. Inusot nga juga laut nilo Max Bernard.
It is not true to say that by the agreement in principle, the Inuit have given away all their rights in the land.
Suling ito, Inuit, judit sa limamin ni, pibihang ni sa limamin ni, tunis dun na ako, sakkus dun na ako, umunga, temeli udaw ni udan na, suling ni mga ito.
The word extinguishment is a white man's legal concept. If they gave up all their rights, how can they have impact and benefits agreements? Because that means that they still have the right in regard to the resources and in regard to the lands. And we say, hey, it still requires Cree consent or Inuit consent when there is development in that territory. So if all their rights are gone, how come they can still do that?
CBC-tiulorsimaga 1968 pigiarsugu 1974 tikitsugu. Kateikkuangi hatigigasuartiit isumainna atsuru hattasimayun atsurullaratsutik atsuru hattasimayu humaitsatitauhattasimatsutillu aqvitaqsutikisiani tusartissisuungulaujumimata makua haritaujaait sunatuinnaait tusartsaneriniusuungulertumaanna ullumi atuqtaulorsimangimata taitsumani.
There were no telephones. You were lucky to be able to call somebody from out of town. So if we want to send a message to our own people in northern Quebec, we had to travel to Montreal, to where the CBC radio station was, do a recording in Montreal, and then they would eventually uplink it through the old shortwave system. So it was hard to communicate with our own people. The best way to communicate in those years was hop on an airplane, go to the community, and have a community meeting.
Akvitaktiyo hatahalauksimayunga muususinaluyumik taavani Hudson's Bay tasiujaktuami akvitaktiyo hatigisitsugu taakkununganunailinnut kuutsuaraapumut inutsuanut puernitumut ivusiimusallun taakkununga akvitaktingulorsimayugu
tamaunga puernitumut tikigannu haurimajauhattalilauksimayugu taikkua Aston Airways timmiyu hutingi haattayungi atulaujummata timmiyu haattayu saneanut aijuit Inuit niuppiuriartu sammuatut kinakkutikimmangaata tusaumangitut tusaumananginatta kisian ukkuitaummat iltariaulerannu himatsiyauvalilauannu huviariauganu tusautikkuuria harpalersunullu tusauti inqavalliallaujummata
taakkuninga uhauserigialivunnu haagannu sivanertau hattalerannu telefuukkut naammasangitunut tusautikku hattatuillu naammasangituut sutik allaa ilanganni upattausigannugu pinasortaugiartusitsunu
upattaulangalerannuguu sakkuatumut kappianuallauksimajo nunagingitattiiniitsunullu ingisilauqsimagama nunagiaqatjarivappaga namullunin aullassimaguma suusiunirni iqqaumagakku
Makkuatleritsunga silamo igitauhattasamarungam niukkutigumiartuusunga talikkutigumiartuuna igitaulleritsunga tunganangitoq teemettumi hattatuhalerami uraarnu millutauhattasuna aarnanartuusuinlu
ikayummanga piruqtilunga taimagni pinga sainaumaleppunga taikununga ilannulu nunannulu
Taikko taamasituluga ilagitninga attutonni paulaujugut uhumaittualoloruli ataatannut iqninga ilautiligu tamatsuminga sakkustitaunialummi ummatikku heasimagaluartunga taimaitto narurianga huvianat nangimmat kisiani piahattauteruilaarungitoq ammalu uqaurluqattautia Nibinibullu sakkulugu isibayuneertaulitsiariarnitni inuuginaasni hoosivinigamaltigu angayugayepiti ilannaarillerminarat.
In 1975, pigiartimalaqtilugit katimalikkuunneqartaujunu community council taikkununga ilagiliutilaorsimagama laorsimaliuviniugama upingapallialermat taakkuagu katutiaqatigiikkut katimagialaartualuummata sallunut.
Salouit was a community that was pretty much divided in support and against the agreement, and so it was a very intense meeting.
Piakni tukkuutitaulorsimajugutatsamani sallumiut inuinnutuinnaulangettoq nunavimmiunu taakkua pitsutikillugaanga qatigigutiviniu taqsaqalertagin tipagilortagin uttuutikillugi extinguishment, surrender and released. Tan jaansiatsia tikilorsimajoq.
I knew that my presence there in the different villages, the different communities was important. And I made sure I went where I had to go. But I stopped at I forget the name of the village. And we said, how am I going to get to Salouit? So one says, well, we can go by boat. So I take a look at this canoe. I said, I'm not going in that water with that canoe. I'll never make it. So he says, well, there's a company here has a helicopter. I said, okay. So we get in the helicopter, and I notice that the pilot is looking at a road map. I said, what are you doing? He says, well, tells me where to go. I said to myself, my God, this guy's using a road map to guide his helicopter. I started to get a little nervous. And then it was fog. You couldn't see, very, very little you could see. And then all of a sudden we came down from the fog and we were in the village. And I remember when I got out, Jim O'Reilly was there. He looked at me. He says, I never thought that a helicopter could make it to this place in this weather.
The meeting in Salouit would be the last attempt for Inuit to unite. Povernituk and Nivujivik were opposed to negotiations. The other communities were in favor.
There were two groups. There was people for and against. Although I did perceive that those who were for were more. They were more representative, but we still had to deal with the people who were against it. And they were very vociferous.
Ukhayangi ukwa nalatawangniangillat ikkualo naammasangitu ukhayaqaluangi ukhayaaluigaluarmagit tiguqqatawngуаниангилат uppiriyattini atunit sangutigatsaagunnaisuta apuumautillaqitsuta alla khiilingugiutineq tamauni ikiangagunuiqattaleqsuni
tutsimana galahattassimaju taitsamani tussaatsuni inuin anneriamini uppiriaminillu uhaagutijumarialuutillugi tamanna ilukku attuinartumarialuussimajuvanni.
Oh boy. There was so much smoke in the atmosphere that, you had to kind of sometimes look kind of underneath it to see to the front. I mean, it was thick in there. It was like, talk about a secondhand smoke experience. It was bad. And all you could hear was the click of Zippo lighters all the time.
Uwagullu ate khaigiti pinasokatigitta Ikayok tigilta kisiani mut latluta. Umangilakilak si Mayo.
Sangutitsiguna pinsoqatigiilorna yuning angiqatigiinimukit yung akatsielortuning teemeegitta anituunnilarsimalugu katinganinganni noqqaleornigu katinganingat.
After Saluit, the two camps met once more, but nothing changed. In the end, the NQIA team, backed by the majority, returned to the negotiation table, determined to get the best deal possible.
Tehematay ko nga ulumutak kimullo isulibbiugia hang nakaktausuni pijarit simabiugia hang nakaktausuni nalunertaumariwut November 1, 1975 mutikipalialagatta.
Il restait 3 ou 4 issues qui n'étaient pas réglées et qui causaient grands problèmes.
Gawamatakaswarniliriyullo avani pivallikhutinillo pinasuartu avani gawamakkulu pigutigisuungit makua ilinnianeq aanniasiortauneq nunaliigavamaapeqarningit angiqatigiituinnaapigunnaqatillu piluartumilli uvagu inuit nunaup sukkutauttaaligiaharningani avatiliqinnermik aqsuruutaqarsutaluulorsimagatta.
The Crees were they were very conscious that the project was advancing. And very shortly, by late 75, we said, if that thing is not signed, they'll never stop the project.
So the situation was pretty serious for both sides.
Canada gawa mga tapikurilyok binganun ailok simarugut ubang ay khataw dilunga. Takwa pinaswak bisaw November 1 pijarit simagiali pijarit simalangat lagunay mata.
It was a horrible day. Rain, Montreal nice, Montreal weather as usual. Finally I turned to Violet. I said, Violet, why don't you go ahead and line up some aircraft? Get some DC-3s and get them ready on standby, because if we don't sign this thing, we're going to go home.
I had an assistant, Monsieur Denis Chatin, and he was organizing the typing. And he had gotten about a dozen secretaries, and they were typing away. It was 2 o'clock in the morning. He had made arrangements they would be there all night to finalize. Then I got a call that the Minister of Justice had certain problems with my agreement. So I went to see him in the middle of the night, and I was a little discouraged because of that. Here it is, 2 o'clock in the morning, I have to convince a minister that the agreement should be signed.
I ran to Billy Diamond, all part of the same hotel complex. I go there and there's dancing and a party with the Crees and all the rest. I said, Billy, what is going on? Here we are, we don't know if there's going to be an agreement or not. Dead? He says, look, they've gone all through this and we've really done our job and we don't know if there's going to be an agreement or not. So he said, if there's an agreement, he said, this is the party to celebrate because we're going home right after. If there is no agreement, then this is to thank them for the effort because we're going home right after the signing, okay?
sa kanya ano ito ang natlo ko pa lihat sa lak sa marot.
Et les dernières heures avant la signature ont été, je dirais, très pénibles pour l'équipe de négociateurs et les Inuits. Est-ce qu'on signe ou non? At midnight, everything would drop. It was as if all the work that we had done for 2 years would come to nothing.
Tamani 6 mi 7 mi unudukut 8 mi tamani atunya siagulok suda ay khurolong ni nala tunya loktiluda ima unuluak tualo kadakho uhak uhaw diyaw nakatlo suna kinguwalo ako tolok mangat tekko hawli manaswak ni pa ako ti imaili hatutugulot alla si maninga ang hatigi ko daw ni aktuday ko nga alla si marunudok ko daw ni aktuday ninyak ko daw ya supilyo uhayaw na supilyo uhaw singilyo akhiya daw hatta sudik.
Je demanderai au Premier ministre de bien vouloir nous adresser la parole.
Comme on sait, cette entente fait suite à 2 années de délicates négociations et qui se trouve à consacrer le respect par le gouvernement du Québec des droits des communautés du nord du Québec, en même temps que de permettre des développements nordiques, des développements économiques exceptionnellement importants pour le bien-être de tous les Québécois.
Inuktito hausarta haqaluaq mangaatsuutaanna ippikusuanngilaqatsimalu. Nam.
Ilunata atiliurealilimaat pitaritsiamata uvagulli inuinniausuta saimooqutivalliasigatta Charlie Watt angani tigusigama tuinganu nallassunga khiammaqiaalumi itiyumi khialoqsimalunga taikkua uqaqataqtaka sunaalunni aniguinivut sunaalukkani hattaniartuinlu aqqasaa hattaniarnivu inuuqatittiningaarli pillunik.
The negotiations have now been completed, and although not all of the points that we had hoped to obtain have not been included, we are an adaptable people, and now we must make the greatest change of our history for our children and our children's children. Thank you.
I have a lot of respect for the Inuit and the Inuit negotiators, and tough decisions to make. They've turned it into something monumental.
The Nunavik of my generation shows what this group of trailblazers achieved. The $90 million settlement was important, and also the regional government and the other organizations. But I think the most important achievement was with the young Inuit, the Davids who took on Goliath. The experience and confidence they gained in the battle to protect Inuit rights enabled them in the following years to take on the government and expand the James Bay Agreement to build what we have today.
Ang iyualam mitaman na ang katigin nuchilinga pitakangman. Kangat tayo kalaktugut, pulay na niyarlat, umiyak tayo kalaktugut, timiw yung kuta kalaktugut, amisyonik, ilniya ng maulingan ng mik, anya vilya katanibut, itluta katarayahang nibut tamak ko ilong nalimati at ipituk to si mamatatak ko nga ang katigin ni mo. Ang maluta ko ang ilaw si mga itugaluat, kalau sa katigit kita makuning at may katigat-tigit kunong makilaw si magalawak tilugit. Sumagiok niulaktui sunasuaqtuvinilliikkua lavammatalunni sunasuaqsimagatta napala napatsialaqivussi.
Tiu patatama hitunga mai.
Sulle atuutikialautse lasuukurunga atuutikialautse inuutsia sorrosillo akoneala makappiularuama tainna panegale ullume inangeemalqteukulo nakukutsia souga. Tahalangat angkaloktunga. Kisane umaruktiong ral. Urnearo dan. Sala maral unne doan.